Okay, Lisa, understand. Okay, for the recording, welcome back. We are ACI course for class 2 on March 21st, 2024. Let's gather our minds here as we usually do, please. Bring your attention to your breath until you hear from me again. Now bring to mind that being who for you is a manifestation of ultimate love, ultimate compassion, ultimate wisdom. And see them there with you. They are gazing at you with their unconditional love for you, smiling at you with their holy great compassion, their wisdom radiating from them, that beautiful golden glow encompassing you in its light. And then we hear them say, bring to mind someone you know who's hurting in some way. Feel how much you would like to be able to help them. Recognize how the worldly ways we try fall short. How wonderful it would be if we could also help them in some deep and ultimate way, a way through which they would go on to stop their distress forever. We're learning how that is possible. And so I invite you to grow that wish into a longing. And that longing into an intention. And with that intention, turn your mind back to your precious holy being. We know that they know what we need to know, what we need to learn yet, what we need to do yet to become one who can help this other in this deep and ultimate way. And so we ask them, please teach us that. And they are so happy that we've asked. Of course, they agree. Our gratitude arises. We want to offer them something exquisite. And so we think of the perfect world they are teaching us how to create. We imagine we can hold it in our hands, and we offer it to them, following it with our promise to practice what they teach us, using our refuge prayer. Here is the great earth, filled with fragrant incense and covered with the blanket of flowers. The great mountain, 4 lands, wearing the jewel of the sun and the moon. In my mind, I make them the paradise of a Buddha and offer it all to you. By this deed, may every living being experience the pure world. Idam Guru Ratna Mandala Kamnirya Tayami. I go for refuge until I am enlightened to the Buddha, the Dharma, and the highest community. Through the merit that I do in sharing this class and the rest, may we reach Buddhahood for the sake of every living being. I go for refuge until I am enlightened to the Buddha, the Dharma, and the highest community. Through the merit that I do in sharing this class and the rest, may we reach Buddhahood for the sake of every living being. I go for refuge until I am enlightened to the Buddha, the Dharma, and the highest community. Through the merit that I do in sharing this class and the rest, may all beings reach their total awakening for the benefit of every other. Let's do our review from the quiz, remember? So what's that Tibetan and Sanskrit term for valid perception? Anybody, just unmute and tell us.
Signa and Pramana.
Yeah, Tsema and Pramana. And then what's the definition of existence?
That which is perceived by valid perception.
Yeah, that which is perceived by valid perception. That's cool. Like, keep that in mind going forward. Then what did Buddha himself say is the purpose of logic? We had that quote.
Only me or someone like me can judge others, and no ordinary person can do it because they will fall.
Yeah, good. If you are me or someone like me, you can judge another. But if you are not like me and you judge another, you will fall. He's not saying we should study logic because he's saying we're making some big mistakes in our judging others. And by implication, we need to learn how to think more clearly about what we believe is true about another, so we can stop doing that. Okay, nice. So, Sema, Pramana, they mean our ordinary, unaffected perceptions that we have most of the time. Only rarely do we have an affected perception. which means that perception doesn't qualify as valid perception. It doesn't mean it's no perception at all. It means the thing that we are perceiving and holding to in a certain way is not that. We've made some kind of mistake. So they give us a couple of examples of an affected perception. Like at dusk, you're driving and something dashes across in front of your car. You slam on the brakes because it's a squirrel. And then you look and it was a leaf. You know, and it's like, we're not in the class where we're going to debate, was it a squirrel or was it a leaf? That's a different school, a different purpose. But the squirrel ends up not being a valid perception. It was a perception, but it doesn't qualify as pramana. And the squirrel did not exist. It was a leaf. So another kind of situation that is a perception that's affected, and so not qualifying as a valid perception, is suppose there's somebody at work that you don't like very much. And then, I don't know, something goes so badly wrong. And you are so convinced that they caused it. But then come to find out later, they had nothing to do with it. So the them that you're blaming for all of these problems, it was never a valid perception. It was a perception, but not a valid one. Not establishing something to exist. Another example Geshe-la likes to give for some reason is your boyfriend, girlfriend is acting in weird ways, and your jealousy makes you so sure that they're having an affair that you yourself start behaving like weird. And then you come to find out what they were doing was arranging your surprise birthday party. And so that partner who was misbehaving was never there. You were so sure they were, but they weren't there at all. Right? Affected perception. So they happen rarely, only rarely for most of us. So why is it so important to study valid perception if 99% of our experiences all day and all night are valid perception? It should be so obvious that we don't need to study them. They say the reason to study them is because the vast quantity of the vast quantity of valid perceptions that we have, they just touch the tip of the iceberg of all existing things. So we're missing a whole lot of things that could be established as existing if we rely solely on what we know to be a valid perception. So it's helpful to study what they are and what they aren't, and these different levels of what we mean by valid perception. By studying logic and reasoning, we can actually learn how to perceive those other realities, those other existing things that direct valid perception cannot show us. So to understand that, we need to understand these three levels of reality. Now, we learned in course two kinds of reality. We learned deceptive reality and ultimate reality, and that all existing things could be divided into those two realities. In a sense, divided isn't quite right. So here, these three realities are in a different context. So we're not trying to fit them within the deceptive reality and ultimate reality. Technically, they're all in deceptive reality, but just separate those two ideas. For these three levels of reality, we are studying from the Sutras level school, and to some extent middle way, but mostly think Sutras school. Sautrantika is the name of it in Sanskrit. Sutras believe all these existing things, they're not self-existent because they rely on their causes and conditions. And it's through those causes and conditions that things come about. So they have dependent origination. And because those causes and conditions change by way of bringing something about, then those existing things are changing. They are impermanent. And if we could better relate to things and other people and our experiences from their impermanent nature, we would be less upset when things go wrong, less graspy when things go right? We would be so much happier if we could just understand the impermanent nature of all things because they rely on their causes and conditions, right? Helpful. Not gonna ultimately help us stop perpetuating suffering, but it's the first step. So all those existing things, Sutra school needs to be able to explain them and explain what their causes and conditions are. So they divide realities into these three levels called Nungir, Kokir, and Shintu Kokir. So time for vocabulary. Yeah. So here are the three realities. Please say Nungyur, Kokyur, and Shintu Kokyur. Apparently Shintu's always said that way. Shintu Kokyur. Gyur means that which is. Nungyur means obvious or evident that which is. So what they mean by that is the category of Nungyur reality is made up of those things and beings that we perceive directly with our senses. They're obvious to us. Nungir. These are actually things like color and shape, sounds, smells, tastes, tactile sensation, and our thoughts. Nungir, obvious reality. Those things that are right there that our sense apparatus perceives. Kokir. Kok means hidden. That which is hidden. So the reality of things which are hidden to an ordinary consciousness, a samsaric consciousness. Kokir is hidden reality. The classical example of hidden reality is emptiness. The emptiness of things. We can't perceive that with our eyes, ears, nose, tongue, or thought. We can't perceive it directly with those. We have to think it out in order to have a valid perception of it. So our valid perception of emptiness will not be a direct one. It will be one arrived at by way of deduction. It will be a valid perception, but valid by way of deduction. We call it the intellectual perception of emptiness. And that's what is hidden reality. We can get to it, but it takes this thinking about it to come to that conclusion. So anything that we come to perceive by way of reasoning is in this category of kokir, hidden reality. The other classical example of hidden reality is subtle impermanence. Now, gross impermanence is part of obvious reality. Gross impermanence is when your computer breaks. It's when you get sick, so your health is gone temporarily or maybe for longer. Or when somebody moves away or dies. That's all obvious reality. That's, gross impermanence, part of obvious realities when it happens. Subtle impermanence is coming to perceive by way of reasoning that everything is being destroyed moment by moment. That isn't our direct reality of things, right? Here's my friend, the pen. You've seen it for months. Same one. But technically, right, it's changed every time we see it. We can get that intellectually, but directly, no, same one. She's got that same old red and white pen. At some point in meditation, from our study, from our practice, from our meditation, we will actually perceive this changing nature of something. You know, if it's happening in meditation, you're not going to see it with your eyes, but you are going to see it with your mind's eye. And we reach that through this carefully applied reasoning to reach this aha. And then in meditation, we park our mind, our awareness on that aha with that fixation, clarity, and intensity that we talked about in course 3. So another example of the difference between obvious reality and hidden reality is that example of seeing a car smashed up against a tree. It's just there. And as you look at it, right, you're driving by and there it is. Your obvious reality is car smashed against tree. But your mind goes, oh, an accident must have happened. That we've used reasoning. It went that fast, right? We didn't have to go, consider the tree against the car against the tree. There must have been an accident because, right? We didn't have to draw up a syllogism. You just thought it through. The accident that we know must have happened is part of hidden reality. We didn't see it happen. It's not happening now. We're not directly aware. The car against the tree is obvious reality. Do you see? So it's like we're doing we're doing logic to come up with hidden reality conclusions frequently. Only if like I go home and I'm telling David about it. Wow, you know, I saw this accident, this car against a tree. My words would say, I was there when it happened. But that isn't really, right? If I were being more accurate, I'd say, I saw a car smashed against a tree, and so I deduced that there must have been an accident, and I hope nobody was hurt. But I would say, wow, there was an accident. Do you see? So we mix the two. Probably more frequently than we realize. The third reality is called Shintu Kokyu. Shintu means really, really hidden reality, really hidden things, which is why they say it like that, really, like very, very, very much hidden. And the classical example of something that Shintu Kokyu is the subtle workings of karma. So technically, the subtle workings of karma are more deeply hidden than is emptiness. We think of emptiness directly as the ultimate thing that we can perceive. But technically, it's not. Deeper than that even is this hidden workings of karma. But by that, what they mean is that the specific seed imprint cause for these specific details of every experience. So it's the hidden workings of karma, the subtle karma that would reveal why the fibers in your carpet are, this one's green and that one's gray and that one's blue. And we say, no, they were just dyed that way. But why? Why that design? Why that particular color? There are cause result relationships for everything, specific ones. A specific something that we did that makes that carpet have that fiber be that color in that location. And it's like the only way those specific workings of karma can be perceived is if our mind is omniscient. So the only being who perceives deeply hidden reality is a Buddha, because that omniscient state of mind is what it is to be Buddha. With that state of mind, every detail of every existing thing of all three times is directly perceived. So for an omniscient mind, that is not deeply hidden reality. That is obvious reality. But for a non-omniscient mind, that is so deeply hidden, we can't even logic it out. Now, we can learn the principles of karma such that we can draw correlations between behaviors, types of behaviors, and likely results with sufficient accuracy for us to be able to guide ourselves in making wiser behavior choices. But in terms of the absolute details of what causes what will cause what, and where stuff came from, requires omniscience. So again, the Nyingir obvious level of reality is that's what it was directly perceived with our senses. Hidden reality, Kokyo, requires us to think about it to perceive it. And then Shinto Kokyo requires us to be omniscient to perceive. Short of being omniscient, we can come to accept deeply hidden reality and what things might be found there by way of authority. And until we establish that authority, our Shinto Kokyo understanding will be limited. It'll be doubting. So there are certain conditions that allow us to accept what we learn from Lord Buddha as authoritative, and we'll be studying that as we go on. This course is primarily about learning about deductive reasoning so that we can recognize how we are already doing it, but doing it in a faulty way, so that we can use reasoning in a more accurate way to help us interact with our own experiences in a wiser way. we're using deductive reasoning anytime we're trying to figure out, why did that person do that to me? Right? What they did was obvious reality. But if we're not omniscient, we don't know their mind and everything about them that was involved in why they said what they said. But if we're not omniscient, we also are not aware of what in me made me hear it in the way that I did and react to it in the way that I did. And ordinary human nature is to come up with reasons for why they did that to me. And the reasons we're trying to come up with could very well be reasons that we're trying to point out, I don't know, how bad they are or how mistaken they are, or reasons trying to point out why, no, they can't be as bad as I'm seeing them, right? Making excuses for them. And either way, our thoughts that we're having about the circumstance, it's through those thoughts that we're working out a story that we then come to believe is true. But that's all done through reasoning. The obvious reality was the sounds, the colors, the what was happening at the moment that set this whole reasoning off. So we get into trouble when we apply faulty logic to come to a conclusion and use that conclusion born of faulty logic to decide our next action. And in doing so, we perpetuate our cycle. So we're wanting to train ourselves to recognize the difference between what's truly obvious reality and what's hidden reality in our day-to-day existence, our day-to-day interactions. But then deeper than that, it also included in hidden reality is those things like nirvana, Buddhahood, some method for reaching either nirvana or Buddhahood. Those are pretty important things to learn to logic out to the point of our perception of them. Perception, valid perception born of reasoning. When they say, how do we establish existence? That which is perceived by valid perception. They don't say that which is perceived by sensory valid perception. It's not limited to that. So correct reasoning to bring something to a deductive valid perception establishes it as existing. So we're getting this glimpse of how important correct reasoning is, accurate reasoning. So are these three realities mutually exclusive? Your homework is going to ask you. Can anything be in more than one of those categories at the same time? Can one thing be all three kinds of reality at the same time? What do you think? It doesn't seem like it. But do those categories of reality, are they objective or subjective? Do they come from them, or do they come from the one who's perceiving them? Right. So those three realities are not object dependent, they are subject dependent. So that means anything could be any one of those three realities, depending on the mind of who's perceiving them. For instance, here's the color yellow. Is the color yellow obvious reality? We'd say yes. Look, there it is, directly with your eyes. But what if you were blind? And I said, look, the color yellow. Then is this color yellow obvious reality? No. So suppose that blind person used to have sight and now they're blind. And you say, look, here's the color yellow. Is that color yellow that I'm pointing out to them? It's not obvious reality because they're not perceiving it with their sense organs. But is it really hidden reality? No, because they can deduce. I remember yellow. She just said, see, there's yellow here. I can remember, so I can decide that there's yellow there. It's a hidden reality for that once sighted, now blind person. The yellow they're seeing in their mind's eye may or may not be this yellow. But because they knew yellow and they heard me say yellow, whoop, they put two and two together and come up with an experience of yellow. But what if that person had been blind from birth? And I said, look, see the yellow? Is that yellow now really hidden reality? Because they have no concept color. Try to describe color to someone who's been born blind. Can't be done. Deeply hidden reality. So same thing, depending upon who's looking. Obvious for us. Hidden for somebody who used to have sight but now is blind. And deeply hidden for someone who's never had sight. Right? So then, can the subtle workings of karma ever be obvious reality? Yeah, to a Buddha. Right? To an omniscient being, everything is obvious reality. Which it always throws me a little bit because we're thinking, oh, we just established how ordinary reality is so limited. But for Buddha, there's no such thing as hidden and deeply hidden reality. Everything is obvious reality to an omniscient mind. Interesting. That means Buddhas have no deductive reasoning. That's weird, isn't it? We need to become so good at deductive reasoning that we become a being who no longer needs it. Because everything's direct. Deductive reasoning is when you take information and you think about it and you come up with something. Everything direct means you never have to do that. So does that mean Buddhas never think? No. But they're not having to think things into being the way we do. All right, so this is pointing out that there are two kinds of valid perceptions, two kinds of sema, or two categories of valid perception, nunsem sema and jepak sema. Nunsem sema means direct valid perception. Not dependent on reasoning. For samsaric humans, nunsam senma is colors and shapes, sounds, smells, tastes, touches, the thoughts, not what the thought comes to a conclusion, but the thought itself are direct perceptions. The things that we actually see or think we see are achieved by way of thinking about taking the information that we got from our sense organs and putting them together into an identity, which technically is happening via Jepaksema. So even as we say, oh, I see the tree directly, we're not seeing the tree directly. We're seeing the colors and shapes, doing some rapid deduction and coming up with tree onto those colors and shapes. It's a little harder to catch this with our thoughts, in that the thought itself is like the color and shape for our eyeball. But then when we string what we think about our thoughts is using deduction to come up with a recognition of the meaning of that thought and the ramification of it. So we could, Geshel's example was, we could have some thought, and then we have a thought about that thought. Oh, that thought was stupid. That thought was stupid was a reasoning, but the first thought was the direct thought. And that's hard to catch in experience, but it's similar to color, shape becoming the object. So we're showing that in order to perceive hidden and deeply hidden reality, we need this Jepaksema, correct reasoning to make a valid perception. Incorrect reason makes perceptions, but they're not valid. Do you see? So incorrect reasoning makes it such that that coworker was intentionally causing you to look bad. And you're so sure it's true that you're acting as a result of it. But in the end, you find out they never did that at all. So your incorrect reasoning brought you to an invalid perception. The coworker causing you trouble was never an existing thing, but we sure thought they were. And we maybe created some negative seeds as a result. So we want to be able to develop our deductive reasoning into a reliable and consciously useful tool to perceive things that people who don't have that tool can't perceive. And actually, when you have developed that skill, it seems to others like you're reading their mind, or it seems to others like, you can see into the future. When you're just applying really careful reasoning to come up to a conclusion that other people are applying faulty reasoning to come to a different conclusion. So it really is helpful to develop this tool, even for an ordinary human life that you just want ordinary human successes. But the reason we're trying to develop it is so that we can prove to ourselves nirvana and Buddhahood and how to reach it. All right. Let's take a break. And we're going to dig into Master Dignaga's opening statements. So let's get refreshed before we do. I'm pausing the recording. Pause. We're back. Is everybody else's recordings back? So Geshe-la used Master Dignaga's opening lines from his text, The Compendium of Valid Perception. So remember, the Compendium of Valid Perception was put together by Master Dignaga from all the different stuff that Buddha said about logic and perception theory. He put it all into one place, and it's too hard for anybody to understand. So 200 years later, somebody writes a commentary on it, Master Dharmakirti. And a couple hundred years later, somebody writes a commentary on that, and then another one, right? Until they get down to being easy enough for us to understand, which for me was Geshe Michael's explanation in the original ACI, right? I can't even read the simplest commentaries and really understand it without hearing Geshe-la's explanation. So here's the opening lines of Master Dignaga's text. So this is from 440 AD. The original apparently was in Sanskrit. It got translated into Tibetan. This is the Tibetan. So please repeat after me. Semar Gyurpa Drola Penshipa Tumpa Deshek Kyop La Chaksal Semar Gyurpa Drola Penshepa Tumpa Deshek Kyop La Chaksal. There's a second line that I'll share only in English once we get there. When you write your Buddhist book, your commentary, when you write your commentary, your opening line will traditionally be paying tribute to the being from whom the subject matter has come. the being from whom the topic you are writing about has come from. So in the text, we often see, not the Buddhist sutras, but in the commentaries about them, the author will say, I bow down to Manjushri, and then something about Manjushri. And that tells you that the text is gonna be something about Manjushri's specialty, which is wisdom. Sometimes they'll say, I bow down to Chenrezi, and you know it's gonna be something about compassion, right? Or method side, or bodhisattvahood. Sometimes it'll be, I bow down to the able one, Shakyamuni. And you know it's going to be about Vinaya. So there are these clues to what the text is going to be focused on primarily. Not limited necessarily, but focused on primarily. So Master Dignaga says this. La Chaksal means I bow down to. It's the namas in Sanskrit, but literally this means I seek from your hand. I seek from your hand. So meaning this being that you're bowing down to, they hold something, you know, not literally in their hands, but they hold something that we aspire to hold ourselves. And so when we go to them with this act of reverence and ask for their help, we're asking them to give us this thing that they hold. And so the words are literally, you know, I seek from your hand. And it means I bow down. La Chaksa. Now that syntax, so here it is, the La Chaksa. So the syntax in Tibetan is kind of backwards. In English, we say subject, verb, object, right? I am going to the store. In Tibetan, they say, I store go. So you kind of have to go to the back of the statement to find out what's happening. And then you go back to the front and figure out which is the subject and which is the object. And I don't know how to do it. So I'm just parroting what Geshe Michael tells us. So I'm going to give you the word for word, and then I'm going to explain it. So I bow down to. Kyo means the protector. Deshek means those or the one gone to bliss. Sugata in Sanskrit. Tumpa, the teacher. Capital T, the teacher, meaning Buddha. Tumpa means another name for our Buddha. So we have protector, one gone to bliss, the teacher. Drola Penshepa. Drola means all sentient beings. Penshepa means all this being wants to do is to benefit. So for benefiting all beings, you could say, Drola Penshepa. And Semar Gyurpa. Sema, here's our valid perception. When you add this R at the end, it means like turn into valid perception. And Gyurpa means the one who has turned into this valid perception. So it's a weird phrase. Someone who has turned into valid perception. English doesn't it doesn't quite fit. What they explain is that when we use the term valid perception for someone who is having it, you can call the person having the valid perception. That's one of those things we got to cook. When we're speaking about a Buddha, a fully awakened being, they are having valid perception all the time. And so they can be called valid perception. Not like that's their new name, but that's what they are. Valid perception. Not one who's having valid perception. They are the valid perception. It's hard at this level to quite grasp that. But so this term, Samargirpa, means one of the qualities of this being that we're bowing down to is that they became valid perception, meaning they weren't a being of valid perception. They did something, and then they became one of valid perception, which means they know what they had to do, what they had to give up, and what they had to take up in order to become one who could benefit all beings. How? By teaching them. How did they reach this state? By way of this great bliss thing. And so they've become our protector because they also know what we need to give up and take up. But the only way they can help us is by teaching us Tumpa. So here, Master Dignaga, who's wanting to put together everything that Buddha ever taught about valid perception, logic, reasoning, etc., is saying, I bow down to this being who's the ultimate protector, who themselves is bliss, who does everything to benefit all beings, and who themselves had to become a being of valid perception. So these 5 qualities, Samargirpa, Drola Penshepa, Tumpa, Deshek, and Kyop. The translation comes out, I bow down to the one who turned correct, who helps all beings, the teacher, the one who went to bliss, our protector. I'll say it again. I bow down to the one who turned correct, who helps all beings, the teacher, the one who went to bliss, our protector. And he actually goes on to say, and now, out of love for those mistaken in their logic, I shall explain the right way to establish correct perception. That's Master Dignaga. Both of them are Master Dignaga. The first sentence is about who the qualities of the being he's teaching, he's using the teachings of. But the reason he's putting it all together is because we are mistaken in our logic. And as a result, most of our valid perceptions are limited to colors, shapes, sounds, tastes. That's not so helpful, is it? If through our logic, we're putting those things together into the wrong conclusions. So his whole book is about helping us learn to use correct deductive reasoning, correct reasoning to come to more accurate deductive perceptions so that we can become a being who has only ninsum sema, right? Only correct, direct perceptions always, meaning a Buddha. So your homework's going to ask, what are those 5 elements or those 5 characteristics that Master Dignaga is bowing down to? Meaning these are the things that we are asking for from the hands of that being who for us is Buddha. We want to achieve these 5 qualities. So I just went through them, but I'm going to list them for you for your homework. So Master Dignaga is praising these qualities of Buddha. The first is that Buddha is a being of valid perception. That means totally correct. Always correct. And we're going to talk about it in greater detail. If a Buddha can only perceive things directly and correctly, then they can't even hear themselves say something incorrect, can they? They're hearing what they're saying. So we're going to be saying, a Buddha can't lie. And we tend to hear it as, well, they won't lie, right? They know better than to lie. But a Buddha can't. Like they couldn't even try and their tongue would get tied. Not like that. They can't. A being of valid perception means totally correct, always. Secondly, that being loves all beings so much. Their sole motivation is to benefit them all. Drola Penshepa. The third quality is that being is the teacher. Not just that they will teach, but they teach the ultimate. They teach the ultimate thing, that which we need to give up and take up in order to bring suffering to the end. Either our own suffering, so the path to nirvana, or bless you, the end of suffering for all beings, the path to our own Buddhahood. The teacher. The fourth one, that this being is one gone to bliss, deshek. Because becoming a fully omniscient being requires virtue and nothing but virtue. That virtue ripening and being replanted constantly is the highest goodness, which is bliss. And, we might think bliss, this highest physical pleasure that we could imagine having. And the scriptures will say, yeah, think of that most exquisite pleasure you can conceive of as a human. That's not it. That's not bliss. Bliss is way beyond that. Not a physical thing, not a mental thing. One of those changing things that's neither one, conceptual, but a conceptual to the level of even identity. Okay? That being identifies as bliss. Desha. And then the fifth one is Kilt, the protector, which means this being is our refuge. The one who can protect us. But how? Reach out and stop the speeding bullet? No. But by teaching us. And they are teaching us and have been ever since they became Buddhas. But I only just tuned in 30 years ago. Right? We need to ask. That omniscient being can't take us and like crack our head open and pour it in. They're telling us there in front of us and we don't see it, we don't hear it, until finally we go, wow, there's something wrong with this picture. I need help. And then whoop, something shows up. Somebody teaches you the pen thing. It's the way refuge can happen. It has to come from our side. And they're just waiting. They're not waiting, they're teaching all the time. But imagine how frustrating it would be. Blissfully frustrating. Sarahni, would you just, get the picture, for crying out loud? I've told you for 1,000,000 lifetimes what you need to do. Would you just like try it on for size, please? And then when we finally do, imagine how they feel, right? Wow, she got it. Wow, you are the greatest. That. Kill. Kill. So of these 5 characteristics, we're wanting to zero in on what is it to become one who has turned correct. Say Mark Yurpa. And how does that come about? And we're going to go through this logical sequence that talks about these others as well. But our main focus in this course is this growing understanding of how obvious reality, hidden reality, and deeply hidden reality, how we're thinking of them in one way as suffering beings and how they will flip around in a different way when we're omniscient. And how do we bring that about? Because it's not the objects that flip, it's our own mind, our own perception that flips. And only we can bring that about, not by willpower, not just by trying, but by learning how to do it and planting the seeds. And then it happens, seemingly spontaneously. But it's because we did the work before. So again, we're building our recipe. And we don't have enough yet to fully get it. So allow all of this to go in and percolate. And my job is to help it be more clear by the time we get to class 11, when you will teach me about it. Seems to work. So I'm actually finished with this class early. Again, I get to bank the minutes because when we get further, I'm going to need extras. I'm happy to take questions, comments, since we have extra time, but I'm also happy to let you go early. So anything on your mind? Going once, going twice. All right, then, let's dedicate. Remember that. Oh, yes, Luisa, you caught me right in time.
Sorry, I have a delay in my internet. It's just for me to understand this. Hidden reality and deeply hidden reality. Okay, we knew the deceptive and the ultimate reality. How this work together?
Okay,
Is there
so
any connection, or is
I
I didn't
coming
get
from,
that part?
they're coming from different schools and they're used for different reasons. But if we wanted to pin them together, we would say that these three realities that we're talking about are within the scope of appearing realities. And so they would all be part of deceptive reality. But you wouldn't call it deceptive reality when you get to the level of Buddha's perceiving everything directly, because it wouldn't be deceptive, but it's still appearing reality.
Okay, so we have to always consider for whom the subject has to be, give the context on how to pin them together.
Exactly.
Thank you.
Yeah. Okay, so remember that one, we wanted to be able to help. We learn stuff that we will use sooner or later to help them in that deep and ultimate way. And that's a great, great goodness. So please be happy with yourself, no matter how confused you might still feel. And think of this goodness like a beautiful glowing gemstone that you can hold in your hands. Recall your own precious holy guide. See how happy they are with you. Feel your gratitude to them, your reliance upon them. Ask them to please stay close, to continue to guide you, help you, inspire you. And then offer them this gemstone of goodness. See them accept it and bless it. And they carry it with them right back into your heart. See them there, feel them there. Their love, their compassion, their wisdom. There for you. It feels so good, we want to keep it forever. And so we know to share it by the power of the goodness that we've just done. May all beings complete the collection of merit and wisdom, and thus gain the two ultimate bodies that merit and wisdom make. So use those 3 long exhales to share this goodness with that one person, to share it with everyone you love, to share it with every being you've ever heard of or thought of. See them all filled with happiness, filled with wisdom, filled with accurate deductive reasoning skills. And may it be so. Nice. Okay, thank you. So be